Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Mayor, I want to start with how you're feeling because you have revealed that you tested positive for COVID-19. So tell us how you're doing, your husband as well, and I believe one of your children.
So I feel fine, Sharon. I just have normal allergy symptoms. I had a little runny nose yesterday, the day before that, scratchy throat, the day before that, just a little headache, all of the things that you have when you suffer from allergies in Atlanta. My husband has not been doing as great. He has lost 20 pounds in less
Oh,
than a
wow.
week, and he is sleeping a lot. But that being said, he still feels better than he did a few days ago. And so I'm thankful it's not any worse. And my child is asymptomatic. And again, this is the scary thing about COVID. My child and I haven't had any symptoms. And the only red flag with my husband is that he was sleeping more than normal. And this is why we have to be so vigilant about COVID, because there's so many of us who are asymptomatic and may be spreading this and not even be aware that we are infected.
Yeah, it's tough for people because you've been so vocal for so many months now with the warnings, the education, desperately trying to get your fellow Atlantans and beyond, your reaches beyond, to heed the protocols. And so I wonder and I think a lot of people are inquiring out there today, what specific protocols are you and your family undertaking now that it's right at your doorstep?
So 3 of my kids, thankfully, have tested negative. So I've gotten them out of the house. And we are quarantining for 14 days. So the interesting thing, it was an interesting timeline with my family. I've had 3 COVID tests. I took one after I attended the protest. I took another one June 30th after I had attended the funeral for Rayshard Brooks. No symptoms, but we've been telling people get tested often, and especially if you've been somewhere with a large gathering. I decided just to have my entire family tested at the same time I was getting tested. So this past Monday, when my husband had been sleeping a lot, I thought, well, we still don't have our test results back from the 30th. Let's just all get tested again. On that Monday, we got our results back. 3 of us in the house were positive. On Tuesday, we got the results back from 8 days before. And my child was positive 8 days before. So had we gotten those results back quickly, then certainly we would have taken precautions over a week ago. But at that time, nobody in my house had symptoms. And my husband and I were negative a week ago. And this is part of the frustration about COVID and how we are testing and how we are getting those results back to people, because it doesn't make sense for us to encourage people to get tested if you can't get the results back quickly.
Yeah, and it has been very difficult. I know you're hearing the stories anecdotally, probably getting some numbers too from people who are complaining that these tests that Governor Brian Kemp and the health department said would be readily available, not necessarily finding it. I finally got my family tested, and it was not easy to find, the place that could take us. And so you've gone through the timeline, Mayor. You got some criticism. I don't want to spend much time on it because I know you addressed it on your social media as well, quickly and briefly. But the notion that you put others at risk when you knew that there was the potential that you already had COVID.
No, and that just was not the case. And perhaps I didn't explain it clearly. I only got tested really because I could and because I had been to a funeral. And even at that funeral, I sat next to my son. No one sat behind me, but I thought, well, we're telling people get tested regularly. Might as well get tested might as well get tested, get my family tested as well. And again, nobody in my house was presenting symptoms. And at that time, that test, I was negative. I had a child in my house who was asymptomatic. And that's what's happening. We talk about this a lot, that our kids are asymptomatic, and you're bringing it to adults. And I know that you have a lovely child this is going to be the challenge as we think about our kids going back to school in the fall, that our children may be asymptomatic and they may take it to their teachers, the cafeteria workers. And this is something that's going to be a big challenge and a big concern for all of us sending our kids back to school.
And you talked about that challenge. I think I heard you in a couple interviews say that you had to tell your children you may not be going to school. Where does that stand today for your household and what you see as the future of Atlanta schools?
Well, my one who's going off to college as of now will be enrolled on campus in the fall. We'll see if any of that changes. I know that they've made some changes with housing. They'll have single rooms as opposed to double occupancy. With my younger ones, I don't know what's going to happen with their school. A decision has not been announced yet. I do have one who, all of my kids have asthma, but one has chronic asthma. And so that's going to be tough, making a decision for that child. And do I send all three into a school, or do I let one stay home? I don't know. And like so many other parents, we'll just wait and anticipate. But I know my kids are very much ready to go back to school. They are over quarantining. They're socially isolated. It's a challenge.
Yeah. The other challenge, of course, that's been something that we can't stop talking about, we shouldn't stop talking about, is what's going on in the community. Sequoia Turner, the little 8-year-old girl who was murdered, that, as so many before, unfortunately, has touched you so deeply. You were very passionate about it. And you talked about, I believe, 75 shootings that, in your words, had nothing to do with APD. And then you went on to talk about social reform in our communities. And if you could speak specifically to that, Mayor, because this is your city, born here, this is where you were raised. When you see what's going on, talk about your feelings as the mayor, the leader of the city, but also a mother.
You know, Sharon, it's interesting. A lot of people don't like for you to speak of those two issues together. But I think it's important that we do that. Criminal justice reform is important. Holding our police officers accountable is extremely important. And I'm going to put a period on that. But the violence in our streets, it's impacting our communities, and we have to give that same anger and that same focus and the same demand for change to the violence that's happening within our communities. And when you look at the murder of Sequoia, it did not have to happen. That was a tragedy beyond anything that anybody wants to imagine. She was simply in a car riding with her mother, and someone shot into her car without regard for life or who was inside of the car. And it's important that we address both of these issues. And this is not just happening in Atlanta, it's happening across the country. And I think there are these systemic reasons that this is boiling over into our streets. I think that people are losing hope. People are dying of COVID. People are unemployed. There's an anger and frustration and anxiety that you see bubbling up. But also, when we talk about police in our communities, this is the reason we need officers in our communities. This is the reason we need officers to be able to help keep our communities safe. But certainly it has to be done in a respectful way, and it has to be done in a way that we're working alongside the community and not against the community.
Yeah, little Sequoia Turner, Tyler Perry, I saw is stepping up once again, offering to pay for her funeral. He says he will do that, but he'd much rather be paying for her college education. So it is a tough one. When we talk about the police reform, City Council, as I know you know, adopted that use of force policy. And I wonder if you could react to that, but also police morale and what we're seeing anecdotally. I'm sure you have more information than I or others about the job police are doing out there and how they're feeling about, in their words, some of them being under attack.
So some of the policies that City Council has adopted are redundant. We don't have chokeholds in the city. We don't use chokeholds in the city of Atlanta anyway. So that part is redundant. But I don't think it hurts to reinforce these policies for the public. We have an advisory council that's made several recommendations on policy changes within our police department. I've signed several executive orders on policy changes. And so we're going to keep moving forward with those reforms. And that, in my opinion, has nothing to do with a budget or withholding funds from a budget. This work has to happen, and it is happening, and it can't happen soon enough. As it relates to morale with our police department, Chief Bryant put it best. He said the wounds were very deep. Our police officers, I've heard everything from they are confused to they are afraid to some are just outright angry. And it is incumbent upon me as mayor and our administration to provide clarity to our officers on what our expectations are.
But how do you do that, Mayor? I'm sorry to interrupt, but how do you do that?
I think part of it is revisiting our training for sure. Making sure that the de-escalation techniques that are on the book and that our officers are trained in, making sure that that training is where it should be. And we've talked to so many national experts across the nation over the past couple of weeks. And my instruction to my team has been, okay, we are now past the information gathering stage. We've gotten more information than I can wrap my brain around. Now it's time for us to put it in place. And that's what you are going to see happen over the next several weeks. We're bringing in some national entities who've done this in other places to help us look at our operating procedures, to help us look at our training, and to make sure that our officers very quickly have an understanding of what our policies and expectations are.
Can Atlanta be the nation's leader in this regard?
Atlanta can be and likely will be. The unfortunate part is that it's on the other side of tragedy, but we still have a responsibility to lead this country in areas of social justice. It is in our DNA. And you've heard this great slogan, Atlanta influences everything. And that also applies to where we are with criminal justice reform.
And we saw so much, people calling for action, angry, taking to the streets, Rashard Brooks, charged quickly by DA Howard. Some would say charged appropriately and timely. And I wonder if you can talk about what you're hearing in that regard. And you've also said that, with this runoff, politics plays a role in everything. And you have said that people can decide whether Paul Howard should stay or go. Do you have a personal opinion about that?
No, I know Fonnie Willis very well. We worked together for many years. I've known Paul for many years as well. So I've not publicly expressed my opinion about either one of them. But I do think that it's important, and I've said this before, that to the extent that we have other use of force cases in the DA's office, that we need the same swiftness in addressing those cases and having some finality with those cases as well. And I'll let the public decide. What was before me was the decision whether or not to fire the officers who've been accused of wrongdoing. I've made that decision, and the district attorney has made the decision that he thinks is appropriate.
And you have said that he did not consult with you about it prior to it. I wonder if you have thoughts on Governor Kemp, the National Guard, and who belongs policing Atlanta's streets, who belongs assisting police here.
The governor certainly has a right to bring in resources to protect state buildings. I do think that it's overkill to bring in military tanks and park them on our city streets. And I just wish that the governor would be clear. It's because he wants to protect the buildings. He's not protecting the people of Atlanta. That he's not supporting our police department in that regard. He's protecting state buildings, which he certainly has a right to do. but I do think that you are potentially inflaming already very volatile situations when you park military vehicles on our streets. It is very much a Trump-ish type move, and I think that's where he's getting his direction from.
There have been reports, and you've said very little about it because that's what you do, about you being vetted to be a vice presidential candidate to run alongside Joe Biden. Can you give us any update there, Mayor? Are you happy to be considered still?
Sharon, that's for other people to discuss. And with 330 million people in America, it's an honor to have my name mentioned as a potential running mate. But I have a really big, busy job that I do every day, and that's where my focus is. And if my phone rings and I get a call, I'll give it the consideration it's due at that point. But all I can do is take my job as Atlanta mayor one day at a time. And right now it's really 1 hour at a time. So I'll do that for other people to discuss.
It seems so, 1 hour at a time. You have gotten some pushback, some criticism, and you've reacted passionately, we'll call it, about it. This accusation that you're an absentee mayor as your national profile raises, and it seems every national outlet wants a piece of you every single day. How do you respond to that? Because as I said, you were quite passionate the other day.
I think that's silly. And I say that because you do interviews every day. Interviews may last for 5 minutes if you're doing a broadcast interview, and that's a long time to get 5 minutes on television, a little longer with print publications. And so in the course of an interview, I may receive 1 or 2 questions about running for vice president, but by and large, it's about Atlanta and how I am leading in Atlanta, because people are interested in what's happening in the city. And so that you don't get to become the mayor of Atlanta, especially as a woman, and not be able to multitask. I multitask every day, and I've been doing it for a very long time. And I like to think that I do it pretty well. And so this notion that I am distracted by talk of being vice president, I think that's a distraction that other people are focused on and not me.
There is this pushback, Mayor, this dance with the media, and things seem to be changing as social media grows, as people begin to do that direct to market thing where you have, COVID-19 and the education there and the politicization of it, really, and the mask and the whole thing. You have systemic racism and the fight to end that, all of these things colliding. And then you have this national election. And I wonder if in your role, because you speak to us so much, if you think the media has a changing role, if you will, in dealing with any of those things in the relationship with the public. Is advocacy the role, or is the role to challenge?
Sharon, that's a tough one, because I was a journalism major, and I didn't work very long professionally, but my training was that the media was to be objective and to provide the facts and not to insert its opinion. And we see that line has now been blurred. And so the reality is that we are where we are. Everyone has an opportunity to speak directly to their audience, but I do think it makes it much more challenging for people to really sort out what's real and what's not. I do think that if there's one thing that Donald Trump got right, and that one thing was the ability to speak directly to his base. Unfortunately, he doesn't speak with truth. So I think that people really have to work a little harder to find information that's credible information, that's objective information. And I think people have to be a little more careful not to be influenced and not to be confused by information that's distributed simply as propaganda.
Yeah. Do you have concerns about the upcoming election and access?
Oh, I have a lot of concerns about the upcoming election. When you look at the mess that happened in Georgia in June, I think it's a preview. And the unfortunate part, that June election had been put off twice. It initially was scheduled for March, then scheduled for May. And then when we pushed it back to June, or when the Secretary of State pushed it back to June, that was the best that we could do. So people need to make sure that they vote early, that they don't assume that they are on the voting roll. You need to check your status regularly. I have a cousin who has voted for over 30 years at the same precinct. He showed up to vote. He had been purged. They told him that he was a convicted felon, which he is not. So this voter suppression is taking on all sorts of forms. I personally requested an absentee ballot that I never received. So you have people who don't have access to the ballot. You have people who are being purged. And then you have lines where people waiting 8 hours to vote. This is going to happen in November, and I anticipate it's going to be 5 times worse in November. So we have to do everything that we can do to make sure that our vote is counted. And that means don't wait until the last day, and don't assume that your name is still on the voting roll.
Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, we appreciate you so much, Mayor, and Godspeed to your family. We hope that everybody stays okay and on the mend. Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much,
Mayor. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.